How was your birthday, Monday? How was your birthday, Victor?
Well, I don't know how 89th birthdays are supposed to be, but my whole family was here and that was great.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, you had no experience with 89th birthdays. Now you do.
Now I do, yes.
Well, that's nice that everybody came together. Uh, I'm glad to hear it. And I was in contact with our mutual friend, Michael Miracle.
Yes.
I was letting him know that I was going to have some time with you. So he was anxious and looking forward to seeing the results. I I just hope and pray I can do it justice, you know.
Do what justice?
Oh, just have a conversation, get a little bit of your experience. Maybe you could share some of your life because I'm also curious. Even though I do this film show, talk show about film, and I think a lot of it's film history, and of course the Hollywood Blacklist is for
Uh,
me an enormous thing. And you wrote the Bible, so so I wanted to, of course, kind of go over that, and but I also wanted to just to kind of get a little bit
sure.
of your history because uh, you've lived through so much.
Okay. So my history is I was born in 1932 and grew up in New York City and ended up at age 11 going to the Little Red Schoolhouse. And at the Little Red Schoolhouse, a lot of the parents had been involved in left-wing stuff and they knew what communism was, and I didn't. I had come from the Rudolf Steiner school where they knew what the spirit was, but they didn't
Right.
know what communism was. And so at Little Red, I had a
What age were you when you got to the Little Red Schoolhouse?
11.
You were 11, so you had been in the Waldorf or the Steiner schools.
Pardon me?
You were at the Waldorf or Steiner schools before
I was
that,
at the Rudolf Steiner School in New York
on the Upper East Side.
on the east side. It started on the west side.
Oh, okay.
Started there and it moved to the east side, and I went there until I was 10. And at 11, I switched to Little Red. My sister graduated from the Steiner School and went to the Julia Richmond High School.
Why
My,
did they switch you though?
pardon me?
Why did they change you over to this?
Because my sister graduated and she had been in the school with me, and I was a friend of a boy on my block went to Little Red. I used to play uh, games with him and used to play ball with him, and I ended up applying to and going to Little Red Schoolhouse.
I see.
At Little Red, my teachers included, among others, a woman named Blanche Schindelman who taught biology, and Harold Kirschner who taught history. And Harold was an old-fashioned Marxist, and he taught us history according to Karl Marx, although he didn't put it that way, but that's what we learned about him. And 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 that's where I was exposed to left-wing politics. And a lot of my friends I kept in touch with afterwards. Phil Green, who became a professor at Smith College and other places, still writes. He's in New York and is very thoughtful, radical political scientist. And the other, the other,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and the other kids in my class were, again, March Avery, the daughter of Milton Avery. They were sophisticated culturally and politically in a way that I hadn't been at all.
When did you become aware of the progressive politics? Like how young were you when you started catching on that this was the culture there was what it was, progressive?
Well, I guess when I was about 13 or 14 years old, I began to understand what was going on. And then I graduated from there and went to Swarthmore College. And at Swarthmore, again, I was very attracted to the cultural life of the left, which meant going to the woods to sing folk songs, but also be part of a conversation that was consisted of liberal and leftist views and people.
Ideology. Yeah.
And my roommates were, I roomed with, first of all, Manuel Fernandez Federico E. Garcia Lorca Montesinos, who was the nephew of Garcia Lorca, and his father had been the mayor of Spain, a mayor in Spain who was a socialist. And then I roomed with Phil Landick and Mark Merson when Manolo went back to Spain, and again they had gone to Little Red, so I had this combination of political and cultural exposure, which informed the way I saw the world. When I graduated from EI, I volunteered to go in the Army, the end of the Korean War.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would have the GI Bill, and I ended up being sent to Alaska and editing a military newspaper up there, going to the Democratic Convention when I got out of the Army, and then going to the Yale Law School.
But was that when you were up in Alaska, was that your first opportunity? It was a military base?
It was a military base outside of Anchorage. Yes.
Right. And it was was that your first experience with journalism, or had you already been doing that in Swarthmore? And
I was the editor of the paper at Swarthmore, and the Swarthmore Phoenix, a co-editor. And
okay.
So I had exposure to journalism then, and of course, the parents of a fair number of my friends were blacklisted. And I went to Alaska, went to the Democratic Convention when I got out of the Army in '56. And I went to the Yale Law School. And when I got out of the Yale Law School, I went to work for Soapy Williams, who was the governor of Michigan at the time, a sort of leftist type governor,
mm-hmm.
Who was a kind of all-American boy, and as Soapy's assistant and speechwriter, I got to meet Arthur Schlesinger Jr. and a whole bunch of fancy Democrats. And when that was over, when I was in the Yale Law School, I started my own magazine. It was called Monocle.
Is that a storm?
And excuse me,
We have a terrible storm coming.
we have a
Oh my
terrible storm coming here. We called ourselves a leisurely quarterly of political satire. That meant we came out twice a year. And
I like that joke.
yes. And
I saw it on your website.
so there we are. And then I went to work for the New York Times Magazine as an editor and a writer. I started freelancing, and I freelanced for them, and they hired me as an editor. And I worked there for a few years, and then left to write Naming Names, and then ended up going to The Nation. Ended up actually with Ramsey Clark. I had written the profile of Ramsey Clark, and Ramsey invited me to be his campaign manager when he ran for the Senate in New York. So I was his campaign I called myself his campaign mismanager. I was his campaign manager.
Okay.
And during that campaign that I met young Hamilton Fish, who was just out of Harvard, who is the grandson of the reactionary conservative Hamilton Fish. And he was a great fundraiser, and everyone would take his calls because he was working for Ramsey Clark. And what's Hamilton Fish doing, calling, asking for money for Ramsey? And Ramsey was way ahead of his time, wasn't taking more than $100 for anyone, and from anyone. And after the campaign was over, we won the primary and then lost the general to Jack Javits, who was the #1 vote getter, Republican vote getter in the country. After that, the nation came up for sale, and I recruited Ham to be my partner. And we had to raise money from a group of people, and we raised the money to acquire the nation.
And then you became the publisher.
Ham became the publisher. I was the editor, and then eventually, I became the editor and publisher, and that was my life for the next couple of decades. And I recruited Katrina Vanden. We started an intern program that included, among others, Katrina Vanden Heuvel. And when I left, I made her my successor. And that's the short of it. And here we are.
That was a condensed version.
I went to the Columbia Journalism Review and taught at Columbia, became the chairman of the Columbia Journalism Review. And during all this period, I had my own politics, which I did not confuse with the journalism at CJR, but it was clear that's where I was, as the nation symbolized. So,
were you? Was it Barbara Koppel that made a documentary a few years ago on the nation? Or
I should remember that, but yes.
Thank you, Anne.
My wife said yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I heard her. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, because I'm friendly with her, and I remember that it highlighted, of course, the woman that's ended up being the editor, right? She started as an intern there, I think, but and I'm forgetting her name now, which is terrible. But
Katrina Vanden Heuvel.
That's who it was.
An intern, and then
okay, that's who you were describing.
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, but when did you know, for instance, like when in the process did you decide that that this was going to be your career? Was it in undergraduate? Because you're already, as you said, editing the school paper. But did you already know that was going to be your future?
I was interested in journalism, and I was interested in politics, and I wasn't sure which way I was going to go. And so I thought the law was a way that I could have an income while I did my politics or journalism or whatever I ended up doing. And that's and journalism, as I said, I started this magazine when I was in law school of my own, and had an attraction for me, and it was a natural thing for me to do. Writing came easily to me, and so there we were.
So it was about 40 some years ago. You decided to write this book, and going before you started, did you have certain assumptions about the blacklist, or maybe about your feeling about informing? Were there any prejudices you brought with you that maybe were dispelled? I mean, or
yeah, I believe that the blacklist was an evil institution, and that it carelessly lumped together communists, progressives, left-wing Democrats, didn't make the distinctions that I subsequently discovered frequently it did make. But I thought it was something that was harmful to what was politically possible in this country, and that it wounded and stigmatized the left in a way that it didn't deserve. And it prevented open discussions, and people couldn't get jobs that they should have been able to get. And I admired people like Dalton Trumbo, whose the technical details of whose life I did not know, but I knew that his public self and what he said and what he stood for. And I considered that the Rosenbergs were probably framed, and subsequently came to believe that Julius was a spy and that Ethel wasn't. And in either case, they shouldn't have been executed. And so there we are.
Sorry, I forgot I muted myself. I just don't like the background noises and
No problem.
interrupting. Did you you focus on the Hollywood Blacklist, but it was part, of course, about multiple industries or areas that were under the scrutiny of HUAC or of that were scrutinized, like writers, of course, outside Hollywood or academics, etc. But you focused on Hollywood. Was there a reason why you?
Well, the Hollywood 10, the so-called Hollywood 10, were very much in the news, and I got interested in them.
Okay.
And I started reporting on them, and I wrote a story about them for the New York Times, as I remember it, and got to talk to them. And in the course of that, I decided there was a book there that I wanted to write. So,
well, thank goodness you did. Did you figure how was the access? How hard was it to get access to the Hollywood 10? Well, you had it from the article, right? So So did that give you did that open doors once you had them to talk to all sorts of other people? Because it's so thorough.
It opened doors to talk to people like Albert Maltz and Dalton Trumbo and John Howard Lawson. But it probably closed some doors that I wasn't fully aware of at the time. So.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. How would you know what you don't know, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, you brought up Albert Maltz and Dalton Trumbo, of course. It's their letters, their correspondences that kind of encapsulate the ultimate. Well, I guess that's more about forgiveness, not this. But the idea, the real sort of, for me, the dilemma is who's the victim, right? Is everybody a victim? There's one common enemy, that much we can agree on, right? Which was the panel, the committee.
Yes, the committee, Senator McCarthy, and then people like Roy Cohn, there are a whole bunch of folks who were attached to them.
Sure.
And but in Trumbo and Maltz had their own disagreements, and there was a lot of tension between them. And I sort of agreed with Albert Maltz's analysis of everything, but I had
kind of
more
leaned on
admiration for Trumbo's attitude about life. He was an enjoyer. So.
Right, and his feeling is it doesn't get you further by holding on to anger and holding on to resentment and the poison, that you have to kind of just make peace with it and get beyond it. And part of doing that is forgiveness, right? Ultimately.
I think you're right. So, and I think, but they were all, each one was different in his or her own way. And
right.
So I got to learn about that.
Did you have because I feel like I do understand this idea that, like a Sterling Hayden or Waiting for Lefty, of course, Elie Kazan's buddy who wrote Waiting for Lefty, Clifford Odets.
Clifford Odets, right.
There were a series of people that informed, and one, of course, could argue that they're victims, I suppose. But my thing I always go back to is if I feel like it dilutes what all the sacrifices that those who refused to name names made. Like, aren't we diluting their true situation by calling informers victims?
I'm not sure I caught the question, but.
Well, I'm asking you, I guess I guess it wasn't really well framed as a question. I feel like that's my dilemma. I mean, I've kind of I know where I stand, and I guess I was wondering if you had a strong feeling about it. I know Michael Mirapol said that he sides with Maltz and that doesn't forgive. Informers.
Right, right. Like, it's, as you know, it's a very complicated situation. I came
Well,
to,
and your book explores all the nuances of how you go into detail because it is complicated, and you give every side of this conversation. I think you give every angle, every perspective.
I came to admire the talent of Bud Schulberg, although I resented what he did and disagreed with his explanations of why he named names,
His rationale.
his rationale. And Kazan was obviously a talented guy, but the satirical side of me said, yes, you will give him the Oscar for his talent, but print on the back of it all the names of the people that he named. So
that's funny.
Which was funny, but it was the way I felt in a real way. It symbolized the way I felt about it. So,
right. There was, I forget who I was reading, but somebody kind of came up with one of the rationales for Kazan because he contributed. His films had such strong messages, and he contributed so much that might have been his mea culpa, his, I don't know, you know what I'm saying? Like, in other words, some people apologize. Sterling Hayden walked around with a lot of with the burden of guilt, right? Self-imposed guilt, and was public about it. Whereas Kazan doubled down, like his memoir, his autobiography. He really doubled down. He never apologized for his choice. Yeah, I guess I'm losing my point. I guess it's very nuanced. All of the choices that everybody made, right? I mean, that whether they informed or not. I don't know. Did you ultimately have a feeling about it, about informers versus non-informers?
Well, yeah, but it varied from person to person. As a general proposition, I thought it was wrong to name names, but in each case, you wanted to see what the person thought they were doing and why they did it, and you made different judgments about them. And so I identified with the psychological dilemmas that some of the people who named names faced, but I didn't agree with the way they came out when they did name the names, and I admired those who put their careers and lives at risk by resisting.
Did many of them talk to you?
The people who name names? Yeah, I'm sure they did. And Schulberg talked to me at some point, and Kazan talked to me on the street, and I lived a couple of blocks from him, and so I did get to, and I talked to their attorneys, Martin Gang and others.
Yeah.
So
that was for me. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm interrupting you.
No, who played a complicated role in that era.
Yeah, these are parts of the book which were brand new to me. There was Martin Gang, who was an attorney who was urging people to inform, essentially, right?
Yes.
And then there was also the psychiatrist, which we think who was probably a FBI. Not what do they call? Not a. He wasn't work directly for the FBI, right? But he was being paid by the FBI to encourage his patients to inform, right?
Right.
This was all new to me. I didn't realize how many people they reached in their work, but they're pretty central to the story.
Yes, absolutely. So, and there were these pressures from the society to conform. and to go along with during the so-called McCarthyist years, to 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 go along with the expectation that you had to cooperate with whoever was making the accusations. So those who resisted it required something special from them at the time.
I talked to Lee Grant.
Yes.
Did you ever talk to her?
I did talk to her at the time. Yes.
Oh, you did? Okay. Yeah. Obviously she got very fortunate in the latter part of her career, but she sacrificed her entire ingenue years by not naming names.
That's right.
You know, when most actresses make their most have their most success, she couldn't get work in the film in movies. But she said that Kazan had reached out to her a couple of times, but she wouldn't talk to him. And then much more recently, and I was very moved by her saying this, because she said that it was only in the last years that she's learned to forgive, not to forget, but to forgive, and to make peace with it, and to understand what I think she was the one who said that, because of what he was able to make, as a filmmaker, there was something there to however you want to look at it, there was something there about what he was able to accomplish, after he already had named names, the films that he had continued to make, which were groundbreaking.
Right.
A Face in the Crowd. So the book came out about 1980, 81.
I'd have to look up exactly when it came out.
No, don't worry about it. But how was? Sorry.
I'm now 89 years old, so my memory is not what it should be. So I'd have.
Well, you've been doing great. I mean, honestly, given the questions and everything, I think you're doing great. And what was the reception when this came out? Do you have any memories of that period of time?
Well, yeah, it got some extraordinarily positive reviews in places like the New York Times and the liberal media, and some negative reviews in National Review and other places like Bill Buckley. Yeah. But it won a National Book Award. So the society embraced what I had to say in that sense. And so that was important.
Do you feel like but did it have an impact at the time? Did it change the way people talked about the Blacklist years or informing?
You'd have to get that from other people.
Yeah.
I couldn't see a one-on-one impact in that way, although there were people who said very kind things to me who had gone through the experience both ways. So.
Yeah, I mean, still today, people ask, like, if you're reading about, or if you're talking about that subject, the Hollywood Blacklist, people still ask, hey, did you read Victor Navasky's book, Naming Names? It comes up. So
good.
It's,
yeah. Well, I still hear from people about that, and I hear the book sells and it goes on. So I don't know what the numbers are or anything like that. But it has an afterlife, so
it really does, because it keeps coming back, right? We're kind of been in this very dangerous period of time again, which I feel like we're in this proto-fascist time. We're in a very delicate moment with democracy is concerned.
Yes, a lot of people analogize the Trump years to the Blacklist years. So.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Roy Cohn. There's that too, right?
Yes, well, and Trump relied on him, and he made him someone who was not just his personal attorney, but he in fact asked others, "Where's my Roy Cohn when I need him?" So,
yeah, it's an unfortunate thing where we find ourselves.
Yes.
I don't quite understand why so many people seem not to have really valued democracy or take it for granted. Do You have any feelings or thoughts about it? Like, how is there so many people that are?
No, I think that's the big question of why do so many people accept the big lie and all of the hate imagery and feelings that go with it. And the numbers are very disturbing because they're in the 30s or in the Republican Party higher than that, and people not objecting to that as if they haven't learned the lessons of the McCarthy years. So.
Is it too simplistic just to say it's racism, or is that?
I think it is, because there's more than just racism. There's racism in some of it, but there's hatred of white people as well as assumptions about people of color.
Are you in touch with any of the families still of maybe those who have or have not nicknames? I mean, or that come from the book, or like the Mostels or anyone else like that? Or
I'm in touch with Kate Lardner. She stays in touch.
Oh.
She's Ring's daughter, and
sure.
his brother originally was adopted by Ring, and we're in touch. And I see her whenever I can. So.
Well, that's terrific. Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, it's an overwhelming subject, but it's one that's captured my attention recently. Maybe because of where we find ourselves, I'm not sure. But I reminded that I put down to get a copy of the Sterling Hayden memoir because I've never read that.
Right.
But I am reading Michael's book finally, which is just heart-wrenching stuff. It's the book he did, with his parents' letters, and
well, I should read that. Yeah.
Yeah, We Are Your Sons.
Yeah, I want to read that. I've read the recent biography of Ethel.
Yeah, that came out just recently.
Yes.
How is that?
I think it's very good. It's a direct correction to the false way that she is remembered. So.
In terms of like the subject of exoneration or beyond that?
No, it's not an exoneration. It's a portrait of her, although it's an exoneration if you believe that she was guilty and deserved the chair. But it's a thoughtful description of where she was coming from, and you see the betrayals all around her. Greenglass, her brother, and others, what they did to her and her mother, who separated herself from her. It's a very sad tale. So,
well, it says a lot about Abel and Anne Meeropol that those boys came out to be such strong people.
Yes, they're extraordinary.
I mean,
the
odds were not good.
But Michael, it seems to me, I agree with everything I read about what he had to say about it. I don't always agree with Robert, who is very critical of my friend, the Yale doctoral, for his own.
Oh, for Daniel?
Daniel. But even Robert was thoughtful in his criticism. So.
You know that they attended the summer camp that I attended.
Which is that?
It was called Camp Thoreau. It was sort of a child of Camp Woodland and Ochika, these and the Lincoln Farm, these summer camps.
Right. I went to one, Camp Tahoney, which had a whole bunch of lefties going there. So
yeah. Well, by the time I got there, it was already the 70s, so it was a very different. We were pretty much different life for kids by the 70s in terms of, coming out of Watergate and the Vietnam War and all that. So life was a lot, it was there was less intense, although,
right.
Depending, I guess, how you were raised. But anyway, I just want to thank you so much. if I have more questions, I'll bother you some other time.
Thank you, and it's good to talk to you, and I appreciate your interest and your thoughtful
Well, sure.
about it. So,
Well, yeah. Yeah, I'll if I get your way, I'll let you know because
absolutely.
I went right by you. I was on the way to Pittsfield last weekend.
Well, traveling, I was having a birthday celebration, as it were, if we're getting close. But anyway, by all means, feel free to stop by.
All right.
Okay?
Yeah, thank you guys.
Talk to you. Okay. I'll
All
talk.
right.